Okay, so hey there, APUSHers. Welcome to another Sours Hour. What I'm going to do with this one is I am just going to concentrate on the Period 5 Historical Thinking Skill Essential Questions activity that I gave you on Canvas. So what I would like you to do is to access those questions and, if possible, your answers. I was trying to make comments on the comment section of Canvas, but there's so many students. It takes so long to comment on everyone's DBQs and everyone's submissions that I figured if I just go over it on here, if you had access to your questions, I wouldn't have to go back and comment on every single individual person's assignment. By the way, you guys are doing a great job on those questions. Those of you that are actually doing your own work, which is most of you, and not trying to get that from somewhere else, you guys are just really doing good. And I know it's some of you, it's a hardship because there's so much other stuff going on. And I want to get to that after this. I want to ask you some questions about that. But to the questions themselves, I'm assuming that you have those questions in front of you or you have your answers. Okay, I'll wait. Okay, so the reason that this is important, the reason I tell you should have your questions in front of you is because honestly, nobody knows whether Reconstruction or Manifest Destiny or Civil War is going to be the question that you're sitting in front of with 45 minutes to answer on May 15th. And if it is, you'd be like, man, I wish I would have, paid more attention to detail about these events at the time I had the chance to. Before I forget, let's talk about that for a second. Periods 3 through 7, that's it. I know somewhere, somehow, somebody told me, or I sent out, or somebody sent out 1 through 7, like the Columbian Exchange and the Jamestown colonization and all that. That is only going to be required if you are connecting something outside the time period. So you're not going to be specifically tested on anything that happens in periods 1 or 2. It's only going to be periods 3 through 7. So we're talking about the first event would be about the French and Indian War, and then the end of solitary neglect, and then the tax protests and all that moving forward, Hamilton-Jefferson conflict, the stuff that you did in period 3 and that you wrote the DBQ on. So what I would suggest is for us to become experts on, if there's 3 to 4 major events of each time period, is for you to become an expert, like knowing everything inside and out of 2 of those major issues of the time period. So for example, here we are in period 5. You have 3 major things going on here in period 5. You have Manifest Destiny / Westward Expansion and the conflicts that caused. You have the cause, events, and result of the Civil War. That's 2. And then you have Reconstruction. If you can become experts on 2 out of those 3, okay, and the same thing for all of the time periods, then you can make connections. You can make connections across time periods, and then you only have 10 topics to become like this expert on. Also, in the course of reviewing like we're doing now, you'll still know about the other issues as well. But for you to just concentrate on know all you can about 10 topics, 2 from each period 3 to 7, I think we'll be okay with that. So you could have sourced the documents as you went through the questions, but hardly anybody did that. You did it separate, which I realized that was quite a bit of work there. I'm recording this at 3 o'clock, so you see that my phone is pinging like crazy because I get a notification when you guys submit something, and I guess you're finishing up the DBQs, which is good. So anyway, the first question was about the success of James K. Polk's expansionist policies. And first of all, let's say he was successful, because if his goal was expansion, he was successful at that goal. So if you remember something called 5440 or fight, what territory was that over, and who was the fight with? Okay, it was Oregon Territory, and it was Great Britain. Okay, that's the first thing. Do you remember the controversy over the annexation of Texas? Okay, that was 1844. Hold on a second. So that was 1844, and that was Henry Clay's election. It was between Polk and Clay, and James K. Polk was elected based on his support of the annexation of Texas. The war with Mexico was the main event during Polk's presidency. Criticism was that the reason that the United States was going to war with Mexico was to claim their territory, such as California, and then make slave territories, or eventually slave states, out of those territories. And the Wilmot Proviso, basically, by this Congressman Wilmot, basically says that proof that that's not the case by banning slavery in those territories. Well, that did not pass. So it's a causation, it's a cause and effect question. How much did his policies cause conflict? So every manifest destiny conflict pretty much is going to be about the expansion of slavery in the territories. Or it also, as a subtopic, could be about the future conflict with Native Americans in those territories. Okay, so make sure, check your answer, and make sure you have that information. The second question was about these antebellum era issues, and explaining which was the most direct cause of the Civil War. I'm not going to go through all of these like step by step, but the Compromise of 1850. If you remember the components of that, one of them was the Fugitive Slave Act, and the California being admitted to the country as a free state. All of these are going to cause sectional conflict. Kansas-Nebraska Act ended the Missouri Compromise. Check your answers to see if you listed that under Kansas-Nebraska Act. Did anybody say opened up that territory to popular sovereignty? I don't think you did. Make sure you know what popular sovereignty means, especially if you are one of the ones that are going to become an expert on the Civil War, like I just said. And then the Dred Scott decision basically said the blacks were not free anywhere they went. They never were. They never will be. That was 1857. In fact, the 14th Amendment, if you want to make a connection, was a direct response or backlash to the Dred Scott decision. But the most direct cause of the Civil War was the election of Lincoln as president in 1860, because he was seen as being an abolitionist, which he was actually not initially. All right, so most of you guys actually knew that, but I would like you to know more about each of those other factors. I could have put Uncle Tom's Cabin in there. There were some other lead-ups to the war. Number 3 said, what was the similarity? So there's a compare and contrast questions in the agendas of Free Soil Party, Liberty Party, and Whigs. This is the one where most people had a mistake on this, because most of you guys were saying that all 3 of them believed in abolition, which was not true. The Free Soil Party were not abolitionists. They didn't care about slaves. They did not want to extend slavery into the territories, because they wanted to have jobs for free whites available without competitions from free labor, as in slaves. But they did want to, in some way, end slavery, whether it be humanitarian, like the Liberty Party saying it was immoral, or the Free Soil Party, or even the Whigs, like the Northern Whigs, wanted to end the extension of slavery, where the Southern Whigs, do you remember who the one of the main Southern Whigs were that was a founder that was from South Carolina? I'll wait. It was John C. Calhoun, and you know he was not in favor of ending slavery. John C. Calhoun, the famous pro-slavery, slavery follows the flag, slavery is a positive good, that guy. Yeah, he was a Whig. So don't get that mistaken with the other Whigs. You know, eventually that's what caused the Whigs to separate between the Northern Whigs and the Southern Whigs, and the Northern Whigs became, like everyone else, incorporated into the Republican Party. Notice I left the Know Nothing Party out of that list as well. The next question says to analyze the extent of change, so that's a CCOT question. And as I said before, your cause and effect question should have the word cause in it in the thesis. The CCOT question should have the word change in the thesis. And the compare and contrast question should say which one was more significant, the similarities or the differences, and how that affected history. So that's how you make an argument out of that. So that's why I'm giving you these HTS questions, to make sure that you know you can incorporate those ideas into your answers, so that you do it on the test, you do it on the DBQ that's going to be asked of you. So this should have change, and not just change. What was the extent of the change? That's what they ask you. Analyze the extent of change, which means you have to have a qualifying adjective in the answer. You just can't say, well, yeah, it's a change. Was it a small change? Was it a major significant change? So those are the words that you should be using and arguing. Because someone else might say, well, that's a continuity, or that's not a significant change because something else has happened before similar. But remember, you are writing arguments. You are arguing a point. So analyze the extent of change in the U.S. caused by the Civil War. I'm going to say that it was a huge, giant, significant change in all three of those categories. So here's the major change in political change in U.S. history based on the Civil War. It created a much more powerful federal government. States' rights arguments were very much limited after that, especially the sectional conflicts that happened before the war. Henry Clay's American system was adopted by Lincoln as a thing, like the Homestead Act. Gave land to settlers, settling the West. The federal bank was strengthened, so no more of those pet wildcat banks. That draft was instituted, saying yes, the government can force you to go to war through a military draft. And to prove that this was a major change politically as well, is there was never another secession. That was it in history. 1860, I should say, with South Carolina was the last secession in American history. So the power, politically, the power of the federal government was increased. Socially, you know about the slaves being freed and the Reconstruction amendments, but also other minorities, especially women, saw the achievements that blacks made during this time period, and then they were encouraged to fight for their equality. And then later on in history, other minority groups as well, based on this. Economically, you know, the South was ravaged, the North was succeeding because of manufacturing. So we have the beginning of something called the New South, which is the South taking baby steps towards industrialization, mostly with the textile industry initially. So whenever you see a question about the New South, or you want to incorporate that into Civil War era questions, make sure you know what the New South is. It's not, you know, the South is still an agricultural, or still was agricultural after the war, with, you remember, the sharecropping and things like that, and eventually, you know, slave owners getting their land back, based on the Constitution saying that you can't take property from property owners without due process. But the South still stays agricultural. But the industrialization of the South is called the New South. All right, so that was an effect of the Civil War. And then the last question says, do you think the goals of Republicans were met during Reconstruction? What were the goals, and explain? Wow, these are good questions. Who wrote these? These questions are awesome. I think if you can answer these questions, and if they ask us anything about Period 5, you guys are pretty much going to nail that. So the goals were to reunite the North and the South, rebuild the South economy, decide who would head the Reconstruction effort, whether it be the executive branch or Congress, and then the other one was to give freed slaves equality. So I would say if I was writing this as a DBQ or some kind of a writing assignment, I would ask you to support or modify this, and it would definitely be a modify statement, because I would say although some goals were achieved, not all of them were. As far as if you were going to say whether this was Reconstruction was a success or a failure, it depends on what the goal was, because obviously the North and the South were reunited. The South's economy was rebuilt, although it took a couple of generations. And African Americans got temporary equality with the 3 Reconstruction amendments, but you know, because of all of the restrictions eventually, the Jim Crow laws, the segregation, the end of Reconstruction in 1877, those goals or those achievements were short-lived. You could have mentioned as an example Hiram Revels, the first black senator from Mississippi after blacks got voting rights. But then, you know, through KKK intimidation groups, lynchings, threats of violence, the literacy tests and poll taxes, you know, those are voting restrictions that were placed on blacks. So the South was redeemed, as in redemption, redeemers, the South getting home rule back in 1877. So modify that statement and say, you know, in some ways it was successful, in some ways it was not, depending on your how you want to set that up. All right, so that's a review of that. That also could go along with the DBQ question that I gave you with those documents about how things change, how the views of emancipation change. That was a CCOT question. I didn't want to speak too much about the DBQ that was there, but you should have definitely mentioned the Emancipation Proclamation. And you could have mentioned the Gettysburg Address, and those two documents are specifically mentioned in the framework, which means they could very well show up on the test. So views of emancipation are changing. I would say that was probably the biggest thing that happened, was the issuing of the Emancipation Proclamation. Even though it freed the slaves only in the slave states or the rebelling states and not the border states, it's a step towards freedom for the first time ever in American history. And it caused a lot of problems because most people around that time did not think that slaves should be free. They agreed with the expansion of to limit the expansion of slavery, but not the freedom for slaves. And so that caused, if you remember, in 1863, something called the New York City Draft Riots. The purpose of the war changing from a reunification purpose to a moral purpose was a change in attitude, and that eventually took time, but eventually took hold. So I don't know how you put all that together with the documents, but that was the main gist of it. If there was a great change in people's perceptions of emancipation because of those events. Okay. All right. That said, one of the things I would like for one of you guys to let me know, or some of you guys can text me. Well, first of all, check my website to get probably by tomorrow, which is going to be Tuesday, to get information about your test that was sent to me by College Board that you need to know. You need to be checking your College Board account on a regular basis leading up into this test. Also, if you could let me know how many ACE tests are out there. I don't know when, how, you know, are they canceled? Are they still on? Or when are they? Because I'm not going to give you, and hopefully your other teachers aren't going to give you work when you're trying to, or I'll make it more flexible if you guys are trying to do that. Because here's what I don't want. I don't want teachers giving you guys busy work during the week of our test. I know my work is not busy work, but you know what I mean with some of the teachers are doing. So, and I'm going to probably speak to Mr. Weber or Mr. Neer or somebody about that, and I'll let you know what happens. Okay? All right, you guys, that's a 20-minute video. I don't know who hanged on to the end of this. I appreciate you. I appreciate all the work you're putting in. It's almost over. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And I really do hope I see you guys soon. And let me know if you watch this whole video and you got something out of it. Okay? All right then.